Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. The next 24 minutes of this video is an introduction that I am placing at the beginning of a dozen or so videos. This introduction regards the prophetic signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, 2025. If you have already watched this introduction in another video, you can skip ahead no more than 24 minutes from this point. All right, it is predicted that famous singer Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. This email was composed, as we can see here, on November 15th. Prior to October 30th and October 31st, 2025, it was predicted that Paul Simon would slip and fall and injure his head on October 30th, and it was predicted that the news of this would first be reported on October 31st. God orchestrated a myriad of connections from other prophetic signs in order to confirm this analysis for October 30th and 31st. In other words, these connections from the other prophetic signs were known in advance of October 30th and 31st to be pointing to October 30th and 31st. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. All right. November 27th, 2025, also ended up being another step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is now predicted to be on December 19th. And we know this, the date December 19th, because of the prophetic signs that occurred on November 27th and other connections. Just like how we knew November 27th ahead of time because of the signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, which the rest of this 18-minute introduction will explain. This introduction is extremely important. None of the videos, every minute of them, cannot be skipped. The reason why God does these, this is how it works. It works on the principle of interconnected signs. None of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections with the other prophetic signs. And God does this in order to tell, for a very good reason, and that is to tell these stories that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell without these interconnected signs that develop these stories through the information, through the themes and connections. And it is through these stories that God is communicating extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. Now, it's not complicated if you don't want it to be. In other words, if you are a skeptic and you don't want this prediction to be true, fair enough. Well, not fair enough. You are a completely irrational person when the prediction comes to pass on December 19th. Okay, but I'm going to explain how it works. And in this introduction, we now have two steps that were known ahead of time. It's not complicated. October 30th and 31st, and then once these dates came to pass, we received the clear and relevant prophetic signs that ended up pointing to November 27th, as I mentioned, which was 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. And I'll explain why that's extremely irrelevant. You will see. Stay with me. Now, on October 27th, I'm just going to state briefly here, I'll explain it more in another video, or videos plural. We had the prophetic sign, one of them being the bat, the baseball bat. Paul Simon is known to be an avid baseball fan, as is the Antichrist, known to be a fan of the Chicago White Sox, which is why the fan of the Chicago White Sox, the first black president, who is the second of two Antichrists, was given as a gift a baseball bat from the historic legendary Chicago White Sox player, who was number 2, wore jersey number 2, and his name was Nellie Fox, and it was given to the first American Pope on his plane as he was departing Rome on his first international trip abroad to 2 nations. So God uses firsts in general for prophetic signs. Here we have the first black president from Chicago, who was an avid baseball fan of the Chicago White Sox. Everyone knows that, right? He threw out the first pitch in the playoffs. He famously wore his Chicago outfit when he threw the first pitch for the baseball team in Washington when he got booed for it. He also threw out the first pitch while wearing his Chicago stuff at the All-Star game after he became president. Okay, so he's Mr. Chicago White Sox, right? And anyway, he is also from Chicago, just like the first American Pope. And this number 2 bat was given to the Pope, the first American Pope, who is from Chicago, at the beginning of his 2-nation trip. So that gave us the number 22, which is a number that God uses in his signs to symbolize the mark of the Antichrist, which the Antichrist will enforce. And he also pairs 9 and 22 together. So this 9 plus 9 plus 9 days is followed with this sign that gives us the number 22. And it is 22 days from November 27th to December 19th, the date that is predicted that Paul Simon will fall and injure his head. And that's because the mark of the Antichrist will injure people's heads. And I should just, add why the number 22 symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist is because in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 9, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described, and that would have been a Tav mark. The Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the 22nd and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist changes or alters a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs of 2, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2. And so that is enough for now. Like I said, I'll explain more about what happened on November 27th in another video. There's, of course, a lot more to this. I'm just saying this now just simply to establish how this works and how we get from October 30th and 31st, December 19th. Okay, now the rest of this video must be watched. I mean the rest of this introduction to this video, which will explain how October 31st connected to November 27th with 9 plus 9 plus 9 days. I won't explain how, I'll explain why. I'll explain how this is important. First of all, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is the number 9, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. What do I mean by step in the trail of signs? Well, God's prophetic signs, none of them can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs, something that is mostly missed by other people that are interested in God's signs. And this is also why the vast majority of God's signs are completely unknown and missed and are only being talked about on this channel. The reason why God does this is he is able to tell stories through the big picture of signs and interconnected signs that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell from one single prophetic sign isolated on its own. That's why these signs are not recognized in general by other so-called watchers, and the signs that are recognized are not fully appreciated or understood. The reason why God tells these stories is in order to communicate extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know, that is only being communicated or explained, I should say, on this channel. And for example, there was a tremendous theme that God was using for October 30th and 31st, Halloween, that God didn't, I assume, I can gather, want to use for the final date of Paul Simon's fall and then death. These signs and this theme of Halloween are extremely important, and you will see what I am talking about when you watch these other videos, including probably this video, because what I'm doing right now is making an introduction to these other videos that predicted October 30th and 31st. In other words, there are about 10 other videos that must be watched, every minute of them. And when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they do need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. When the prediction comes to pass that Paul Simon will fall and hit his head and injure his head on November 27th, and it being reported on November 28th, it will prove all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days ahead of the predicted fall. And the reason why that's important is because this will prove all of the information in these other 10 videos that God was telling through these stories that he designed to lead up to October 30th and 31st. He didn't do this for any reason at all. He did this for extremely important reasons. And so that's the purpose of a step in the trail of signs. It further paints the picture and enables God to tell these stories. And these stories could not be possibly told without these steps that served to connect the other prophetic signs in the big picture web of God's signs. Believe me, I know far better than anyone the purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the things that I am saying in these videos, and especially the controversial things that I am saying, which will be proven to be true because they are proven beyond a doubt through God's big picture of signs, which in turn will be proven to be true when this prediction comes to pass. And so hopefully I have made it clear why God did this for October 30th and 31st. In other words, what I'm about to explain in the next couple of minutes is an explanation for the prophetic signs that occurred on October 31st and 30th, and which are these dates that we expected such signs in advance of these dates. And when the prediction comes to pass on November 27th, it will prove that October 30th and 31st were indeed steps in the trail of signs, and therefore all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st that was explained in advance of these dates is 100% correct. To not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, the point of this video, and the point of the videos on this channel. You might as well turn this video off. If you do not appreciate this, you are wasting your time. Okay, so that's what's going on here. So that's, again, why it is that this video must be watched, and the rest of this video will talk about how God pointed to October 30th and 31st ahead of time, and now you understand why he did this and why it is important that you learn what God did to point to these dates ahead of time. Because what God did to point to these dates ahead of time are the stories that contain the knowledge that you need to know. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon, as we expected in advance of these dates. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 + 9 + 9 days after October 31st. Elvis Presley famously covered Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water song, and Presley died from the effects of his fall in his mansion when he hit his head on a porcelain bathtub. Most people don't know this, but professionals believe that the true reason for Elvis Presley's death was not him taking drugs, but the drugs were taken to deal with the side effects from the severe head injury he had 10 years earlier in 1967, when he fell in his bathroom and hit his head on his porcelain bathtub and was unconscious for an unknown period of time. This, in turn, caused over the years increasingly severe autoimmune diseases as a result of the brain injury. And that's all related to, guess you know what? The thing, and we will talk about that in these videos. The thing that causes autoimmune diseases. Now, Paul Simon's best-selling album is titled Graceland. His song Graceland is about his journey with his young son to visit the King of Rock, Elvis Presley, the King of Rock and Roll's mansion, Graceland Mansion, in the 4x4th state. Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt, and Memphis, Tennessee is located in the area of the country that is nicknamed Little Egypt. Elvis Presley, incidentally, has a hit song named Little Egypt from his 9th soundtrack album, no less. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic, and I say that because of the 4x4th state and the number 9, and I'm getting ahead of myself here because God pairs 9 and 44 together. So hold on a second. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic of the King of Egypt's palace. And in the Bible, the King of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist king. The Antichrist king, who will reside in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, and God repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and is located at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. This Antichrist king is the 44th president, and he was inaugurated in the year 09. This is why in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, God pairs the numbers 9 and 44 together. On October 30th, King Charles, and by the way, in the Bible, the Israelites escaped the persecution from the King of the King of Egypt, and likewise the Pilgrims escaped the persecution from the King of England, which is King Charles. On October 30th, King Charles formally stripped, and Paul Simon sang about the Pilgrims in his song American Tune. On October 30th, King Charles, formally this date that we knew in advance to relate to Paul Simon, who God is using to point to the King of Rock and Roll. Okay, so on October 30th, King Charles formally stripped Prince Andrew of his royal titles. One of the main stories on October 31st, the following day, was the question of what would become of Prince Andrew's mansion. And also on this day, news broke that Prince Andrew had hired 40 prostitutes in 4 days while he was in the royal kingdom of Thailand. 40 prostitutes in 4 days hints at the number 44. In his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 to confirm his signs and connections. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9, 23, and 44. And I know these are the numbers because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. Okay, and so the reason for 23 and 44 is because the 44th president was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball. And also the thing alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, the mark of the Antichrist. The 44th president is the Antichrist. So in his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together to confirm his signs and connections. The news of Prince Andrew's 40 prostitutes in 4 days in the Royal Kingdom of Thailand was exactly 2 times 300 days after Prince William and Prince Harry visited the King of Rock's Graceland estate and mansion in the 4 times 4th state. And again, the news on this day was Prince Andrew's mansion. And exactly 2,300, or 2 times 300, I should say, days prior, the princes visited the king's Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. That's a pairing of 23 and 44. Furthermore, it pairs with the 40 prostitutes in 4 days at the other end of this timeline. Okay, now this 2 times 300 days is the equivalent of exactly 4,200 days. And in Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist king's rule is symbolized by 42 months. Also, on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet for prophetic signs, trumpeted that he had renovated the Lincoln bathroom in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. President Lincoln was the 4 times 4th president. Also on October 31st, Trump had an interview in his mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, Florida, with CBS for the first time since his $4 times $4 million lawsuit with this news company. That's another pairing of 9 and 44. The 9 plus 9 plus 9th state and the $4 times $4 million lawsuit. These signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, again, the 40 prostitutes in 4 days, and the Lincoln bathroom named after the 4 times 4th president in the White House mansion, which has 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, these signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, including the sign in Trump's mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, are 9 plus 9 plus 9 days before Simon is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head in his house or mansion, if you will, on Thanksgiving on November 27th, 2025. The 4 times 4th president formally began the tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of the month of November. November is Latin for 9. The renovation of the bathroom in the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in his Graceland mansion from the effects of the fall that he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head and ultimately die from his head injury. Okay, I should also add that the Graceland mansion is in the 4 times 4th state. And so the renovation in the bathroom of the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in the Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. from the effects of the fall he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head, like Elvis did, and ultimately die from his head injury. Also on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet, trumpeted that the U.S. is considering conducting a military raid in support of the persecuted Christians in Nigeria, Africa. Simon's Graceland album was controversial because he visited South Africa during apartheid and he used South African musical influences in his songs on the album. One of the released singles from the album is Under African Skies. In this video, I am predicting that singer-songwriter Paul Simon will fall and injure his head on October 31st, 2025, and he will die as a result of his head injury either on this date or a later date. The social media platform you are watching this video on has a post date that proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time. Post dates cannot be altered after the video was posted. They cannot be altered to a date in the past. Also, the email here that is time-stamped by Google and this forensic notes PDF document also prove that this prediction is being made ahead of time. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. Welcome. This video is documenting this prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall to the ground and seriously injure his head on October 31st, 2025. It is also possible that he will die on this date as a result of the head injury, but it is also perhaps even a little bit more likely that he won't die immediately and that he will die at a later date. I have some ideas as to what that later date might be, but for now, the prediction is that he will slip and fall and seriously injure his head on October 31st, perhaps even going to the hospital. Probably, but not necessarily. Anyway, it will lead to his death ultimately, but it'll be news, obviously, on October 31st or the day after or whatever, that he will slip and fall on this date. Of course, Paul Simon has a big hit, Slip Slidin Away, and that's prophetic and it hints at this. But as we can see here, this email was written on September 30th. Okay, so it has been known for quite a while that God is pointing to this date for Paul Simon's slip and fall. Okay, we can see here, this email was composed on September 30th, 2025. All right, if you are skeptical for some reason, email me and I'll forward this email to you. Now, this email is, and I'm just going to, in this video, I'm going to go through briefly some of the reasons for how it is known that Paul Simon will slip and fall on October 31st. I will explain how I know this in advance. And these reasons will prove that this is from God. It'll prove that this isn't just some crazy person online making a video for every day of the week for years on end, predicting the day that Paul Simon will fall. I mean, that's absurd, right? It would be one thing if I was even predicting his death and doing that, but that would still be a crazy person. In other words, anyone who believes that is the crazy person. I mean, that's completely irrational, right? And literally, that's crazy. So I'm not, but having said that, I'm not even predicting his death. I'm predicting his slipping and falling. Because Paul Simon is old, and the radical skeptic, and it is a radical religion that they follow. Anyway, the extreme skeptic will say, well, this guy must have made a video for every day that Paul Simon would die, and then eventually you would get it. But that's ridiculous because Paul Simon, although is 83, he could live another 13 years. He could, who knows? So anyway, so having said that though, these things that I'll be explaining will be proof that this understanding regarding October 31st in advance is from God. No human being is creative enough to concoct these reasons. And as you will see, these reasons are also related to God, as I'll explain. And so this video will be a collection, if you will, of brief points, paragraphs. Each paragraph will essentially be a different reason for how I know. And I could make an hour-long video on each paragraph going into the details, but it's just a brief summary, an overview of the various reasons. Okay, and so I typed it all out, and I'm just going to read it. This email is documenting the prediction that singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall on October 31st, 2025, and then die from a head injury. His death from a head injury will possibly be on October 31st, or possibly December 19th, or possibly on a later date. Paul Simon performed for the opening of the first Saturday Night Live broadcast in New York City, Manhattan, after 9/11 in 2001. He performed his song, The Boxer. The goal of boxing is to hit the opponent in the head and knock them down, making them fall down to the ground. Paul Simon is predicted to fall to the ground and hit his head. Simon is predicted to fall and hit, and by the way, on 9/11, the towers fell to the ground after they were hit. And they were hit high on the towers, which is also a parallel to the person's head compared to the rest of the boxer's body. Okay, so this is a major reason why Paul Simon is prophetic in God's signs. It's that he opened the first broadcast for Saturday Night Live after 9/11, because Saturday Night Live is known for being live in New York City. And this was 4 or 5 days after 9/11. So shortly after 9/11. And so the show must go on, even though the tragedy had just devastated Manhattan. Okay, and so this is important. This first Saturday Night Live broadcast after 9/11. And Paul Simon opened it. So the broadcast opened with Paul Simon performing. And he performed his song, The Boxer. Now, Paul Simon and Garfunkel's fourth album is named Bookends. Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to the warning of judgment that God gave on 9/11 to America, to repent or else judgment and destruction for the nation. Paul Simon's death, as I'll be explaining in this video and countless other videos, is the bookend to this period of grace and warning, which communicates that the period of grace and warning is finished. It's the bookend. And now judgment and destruction will commence of the nation, because since 9/11, America did not repent and turn back to God. It raced exponentially even further away from God as a whole. But as the dark got darker, also the light got lighter. And many quote-unquote Christians have, for example, woken up. And many conservatives have woken up to the enemy. So as the dark gets darker, the light gets lighter. And that's the purpose of the end times. But anyway, so Paul Simon's death will be symbolic of the bookend to the warning of judgment. And by the way, that was the fourth album. And on 9/11, the fourth plane killed 44 people in a 40-acre pit, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh. Okay, so where was I in this paragraph? Now, so Simon is predicted to fall to the ground and hit his head, just like the passengers on the planes hit the towers and then they fell. Simon is predicted to, actually, there's that famous falling man who fell head first. Probably everyone knows this, unless maybe you're a little young to recall the details of 9/11, but there was the viral, if you will, famous image taken by a photographer, a journalist, of a man falling, because the towers where the planes hit were consumed by fire, and many people jumped out of the windows to their death rather than being burned alive. And there was there was a very famous instance of this. The one famous example of it is called in images, is called in the photography world, I suppose, or in the media world, falling man. But he fell head first. And we're talking about Paul Simon, who was symbolism for 9/11, falling and hitting his head. This just came to me just now. Okay, so Simon is predicted to fall and hit his head 9 months and 11 days, speaking of 9/11, after Carrie Underwood's performance at President Trump's inauguration that was interrupted with a sound of silence. And she, by the way, won the 4th American Idol. Speaking of the, let me just see here, 11. It was 4 days. It was 4 days after 9/11 that Paul Simon performed on Saturday Night Live. And I knew that before, but just forgot. And I knew the significance of it before, because again, it's pointing to the 4th album, the Bookends album, for one thing, and other reasons for why the number 4 is symbolism for Paul Simon and the connections involving Paul Simon in his signs, as I explained countless times in other videos, and probably will later in this video. Okay, so anyway, so it was 4 days, but Carrie Underwood won the 4th American Idol TV show competition. And anyway, she performed at the president's inauguration, and her performance was interrupted at the beginning of it with a sound of silence. The power went out, and then she went a cappella, and people sang with her. Okay, and that was a prophetic sign, because it's all about Paul. It's pointing to Paul Simon here. By the way, she married a famous NHL player named Fisher, and so did Simon marry a famous actress named Fisher. Paul and Simon is Simon Peter, and these are the 2 apostles that were the fishers of men. But anyway, that's another subject. So anyway, Simon's first big hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence, which is why we had the Sound of Silence in Carrie Underwood's performance at the inauguration. The Sound of Silence at Trump's inauguration, before he returned to the White House, was 9 months and 11 days after Paul Simon sang at a state dinner at the White House on April 10th, 2024. Okay? So again, from Paul Simon's performance at the White House, it is 9 months and 11 days to Carrie Underwood's Sound of Silence at the inauguration before Trump returned to the White House. And that, in turn, is another 9 months and 11 days to the predicted date that Paul Simon will fall and hit his head. And Carrie Underwood is known for having fallen and hitting her head at her home in the 4 times 4th state. This is one of the big things she's known for. She fell on the steps of her home and hit her head and had to get surgery and stuff. It's very well known if you know this this pop culture stuff. But that's why God has connected Carrie Underwood, who is known for having fallen on her head, to the predicted date that Paul Simon will fall on his head. But also she fell in Tennessee, which is associated with, long story short, Elvis Presley, who was also known for having fallen on his head. Now, I don't know if I get into this later here. I probably do. So let's not just jump ahead here because of and explain the connection to Elvis Presley just yet. If I don't, it's because it'll be explained in another video. But anyway, last thing I wrote in this paragraph here is that December 19th, 2025, a possible date for the death of Paul Simon, is 1 month and 19 days after the date it is predicted that he'll hit his head. Okay? That's one reason why December 19th might be a date. And instead of Paul Simon dying on the day that he hits his head, will be this date here, 1 month and 19 days later, which will obviously also again hint at 9/11, because Paul Simon is 9/11 symbolism, because his death will be the bookend to the warning of judgment that God gave to America on 9/11. On 9/11 in 2001, in New York City, planes hit the towers, and there was the story of what is known as the heroes of the 88th floor. Also, the Tribute in Lights art installation was made up of 88 searchlights that commemorated the Twin Towers. Simon is predicted to hit his head on October 31st, 2025, and then die. This will be exactly 88 weeks after a famous owl that had escaped the Central Park Zoo in New York City hit its head when it crashed into a tower and then died. The cover art of Simon's newest album uses Thomas Moran's Two Owls painting. This 88 weeks connection is also 1 year, 8 months, and 8 days. Strong's Concordance H188 is the word Hebrew concordance, which means whoa, exclamation mark. The word is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God. Simon's death will be a massive warning of judgment for America from God. Again, like I said, he is the bookend. His death will be the bookend to the warning of judgment that was the 9/11 events. And here we have this 88 weeks connection, which is essentially hinting at 9/11 because the owl hit the tower in Manhattan. Okay, but it hit its head and then fell and died, which is the prediction for Paul Simon. Now, Paul Simon is prophetically linked to Central Park because of his prophetic reunion concert with Art Garfunkel. The feud between Art Garfunkel, who were born 23 days apart and have been friends all of their lives, is symbolic of the Civil War in America that is currently escalating and is leading to genocide by the left on true conservatives and true Christians. And the purpose of this prediction that is from God is to prove the things that I am saying, the controversial things that I'm saying, including what I just said, but of course that's just another prediction. It's not exactly a fact. But anyway, everything else that I've explained in this paragraph is a fact. One thing to add is that the number 188, which is whoa exclamation mark, is also a 9/11 number. Because the second plane had a crew of 9. The first plane, Flight 11, had a crew of 11 people and flew into the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11. But the second plane had a crew of 9, which is a 9/11. So the second plane with its crew of 9 people flew into the second tower 17 minutes after the first plane, which was the second witness. Because in the Bible it says that 2 or 3 witnesses are required to confirm a matter, and after the first plane hit the tower, people were confused as to whether it was an accident or an act of terrorism, and then 17 minutes later it was confirmed that it was terrorism and therefore a warning of judgment from God. Well, anyway, 17 divided by 9, 9 crew, 17 minutes after the first plane. 17 divided by 9 is 1.88 into infinity, 1.88. That's how it is a 9/11 number. Also, the Antichrist was president from 09 until 017, and that also gives us whoa exclamation mark. Wally Amos, the founder of famous Amos Cookies, was the first agent to sign Simon and Garfunkel. Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week, and in ancient Israel, 3 a.m. was the beginning of the 4th watch. So you've got 3 and 4 here. In the first chapter of the book of Amos, a Hebrew idiom is repeated, quote, for 3 transgressions and for 4, unquote. The meaning of this idiom is that the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and judgment and destruction is unavoidable. This idiom is repeated in the first chapter of Amos, which has 15 verses. The prophetic dream Simon received in which, and so there you go. So, well, let me just finish this. The prophetic dream Simon received in which a voice instructed him to make his most recent album, 7 Psalms, occurred on the date 115, which hints at Amos chapter 1 with its 15 verses. Okay? Now, famous Amos hints at this, because famous Amos was the first agent to sign Simon and Garfunkel, and their first album, Wednesday Morning, hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4. And in the book of Amos, we have the for 3 transgressions and for 4 in the first chapter with its 15 verses, because it's repeated a few times in that chapter within the 15 verses. And that's why Paul Simon's prophetic dream was on the date 115, which instructed him to make the album 7 Psalms, which hints at the 7 trumpets of judgment that follow the period of the sound of silence that was heard in heaven in the book of Revelation chapter 8, which is why Amos died at the age of 88. The first concert in Simon's tour to promote 7 Psalms was on the date 4/4 this year. And it was exactly 30 weeks before Simon's predicted fall and death on October 31st. That hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4. The theme of the album is of crossing over into the afterlife. The date 4/4 plus 30 weeks hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4, and Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., which contains Simon's Sound of Silence song, because the name of the album is Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m. But that album has the Sound of Silence song on it. The description of a sound of silence in heaven in the book of Revelation precedes lightning and thunder in heaven and the 7 trumpets of God's judgment. The first 7 Psalms concert, as in 7 trumpets, on 4/4 in 2005 was in New Orleans. 4/4, this concert date, was also not only 30 weeks exactly to Simon's predicted fall, but it was also 3 months and 3 days after the attack in New Orleans on the date 1/1. Okay, so the concert in New Orleans on the date 4/4 was 3 months and 3 days after the attack in New Orleans on the date 1/1, involving a terrorist using a Ford, which hints at the number 4, lightning truck to kill people. The attack occurred on a Wednesday morning at 3 a.m. That's astounding. It was reported, and by the way, New Orleans is relevant to Paul Simon because not only because of the first concert date, but also in the famous Graceland song, he's driving to Graceland on the highway through the Mississippi Delta, and so he would have started his journey in New Orleans. So it was reported that on the same night as the attack, using a lightning truck, that's the name of the type of truck, model name, which was at 3 a.m. Okay, so on the same night as the lightning truck attack at 3 a.m., the iconic 4 iconic buildings in New York City and Washington, D.C. were struck by lightning. Okay, and it was news. The media was like making note of how coincidental it was. The mainstream media, like literally the mainstream big media, made a story about this. It was the Empire State Building, One World Tower, Washington Monument, and Capitol Building. And all of these locations hinted at the 4 planes on 9/11 that were intended to strike the 4 iconic buildings. And the 4th plane crash killed 44 people in a 40-acre pit because the plane crashed at a 40-degree angle 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh. So So you get the idea here. This lightning was a Paul Simon sign because of the lightning that follows the sound of silence in heaven. No doubt Paul Simon sang, or who knows, but probably he sang Sound of Silence at the concert in New Orleans on the date 4/4, 3 months and 3 days after the lightning sign, which was pointing to the sound of silence. It was a Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. At 3 a.m. was the attack using the lightning truck. Also on that day, by the way, was the Tesla that blew up in front of the Trump Tower, or Trump Hotel in Las Vegas. And Tesla is symbolic of lightning. Not only is it electricity, but Tesla was famous for his lightning experiments. And Trump hints at the trumpets. 7 people were injured in that Tesla explosion, which hints at the 7 trumpets of judgment that follow the lightning and the sound of silence. And that was the chronological order. Furthermore, the Tesla explosion was later in the day, after the lightning and the lightning truck attack, during the night. God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. Simon is predicted to hit his head 44 plus 44 plus 44 days after Simon's 4th concert in New York City at the Beacon Theater on the day that the president from New York City, who is from New York City, hit Iran's Fordow nuclear facility. Okay, so we knew in advance, long in advance, that the Fordow facility would be hit, and we knew that it would hint at 4. By the way, well, never mind. That's another story. Well, it was 4 plus 4 plus 4 days after the author Forsyth died, who authored The Day of the Jackal. It's a prophecy pointing to the Temple Mount. Anyway, and that was 44, and we knew that day in advance also because it was 44 days after Trump and Zelensky met at the Vatican. And Zelensky is symbolic of 44. And that's how I knew 44 days later. One reason. Actually, it was known beforehand. And then the 44 days confirmation when Trump met Zelensky. But the reason why Zelensky is 44 is because he just turned 44 at the beginning of the war, and so was essentially 44 years old throughout the entire first year of the war, and appeared in a number of prophetic signs as a 44-year-old. And he was on the world stage in these signs, and that's because the 44th president is the Antichrist, who will be on the world stage. Okay. Well, anyway, back to what I was saying. God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and Simon is predicted to hit his head 44 plus 44 plus 44 days after Simon's 4th concert at the Beacon Theater in New York City, which was on the day that Trump bombed Fordow, the nuclear facility. Why don't I just add this too, that Paul Simon's Graceland Mansion song and album is ultimately hinting at the White House mansion and the 44th president, and Graceland is in the 4 times 4th state, and it's pointing to the 44th president returning to the White House as the Antichrist king, which is why the king of rock and roll dwelled in the Graceland mansion that Paul Simon sang about. So anyway, that mansion has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. Trump is currently adding another room to it, which will then make it the 44th semi-prime number of rooms, which is a number that only is divisible by 2 other prime numbers, and God uses that also. Also, the mansion is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head on October 31st, 2025, 3 months and 3 days after the shooter died on the 33rd floor in the Midtown Manhattan mass shooting after targeting the NFL's headquarters because of his grievance over his head injuries he suffered while playing football. So if you know the story, the shooter mistakenly went up the wrong elevator bank. He intended to get to the NFL headquarters, but the elevator he took didn't go to that floor. So he ended up on the 33rd floor and then killed himself there. I think he shot himself in the head. I'd be surprised if he didn't, given the prophecy here. But his grievance was head injuries, and that's why he targeted the NFL's headquarters. Okay, and this is all pointing to Paul Simon's predicted head injury 3 months and 3 days after the shooter shot himself, probably in the head, on the 33rd floor. And it was in New York City, where Paul Simon is from. And I believe the tower was close to Central Park. And I explained earlier that Paul Simon is linked to Central Park because of the prophetic reunion concert with Garfunkel. So there's obviously a ton more details of amazing connections and prophecy regarding the Midtown Manhattan shooting. But like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm just going to briefly go through in a superficial way the surface of these signs that are revealing the date October 31st, just to prove that October 31st is known ahead of time and that this prediction is from God, because no human being is creative enough to concoct all of these reasons, including this 3 months and 3 days connection from the 33rd floor. Strong's Concordance H188, which is the word that means whoa exclamation mark. Okay, that's the 188th prime number is 1123. Simon's sound of silence hints at the sound of silence in heaven in Revelation 8:1. On 9/11, 110 stories collapsed due to planes that were destined for Los Angeles. On 8:1, Revelation 8:1, which hints at Revelation 8:1. So on the date 8:1, let me just repeat this. God uses this number H188. I've already mentioned it already in this video. The 188th prime number is 1123. Okay? The sound of silence hints at the sound of silence in heaven in Revelation 8:1, Paul Simon's Sound of Silence song, the song that launched his career. Okay, so that's Revelation 8:1. And on 9/11, 110 stories collapsed due to planes that were destined for Los Angeles. On the date 8/1, which hints at Revelation 8:1 in 2025, a storied, and that's how the articles posed the story, a storied mansion in Los Angeles sold for $110 million. The $110 million mansion sold 2 months and 30 days before Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head. Okay, so that $110 million mansion sale plus 2 months and 30 days hints at 1,123, which gives us the woe, which is again a 9/11 number because the second plane with a crew of 9 hit the second tower 17 minutes after the first plane, and 17 divided by 9 is equal to 1.88. Whoa, exclamation mark. Also, the Antichrist was president from 2009 until 2002 until 17. Now, on 9/11, the towers that fell were 110 stories. And that's why this mansion story of 110 million, the planes were destined for Los Angeles. And here we have this storied mansion in Los Angeles selling for 110 million. Okay, now, God uses records for prophetic signs in general. Simon's best-selling album is titled Graceland, after the storied mansion that belonged to the king of rock and roll. Graceland was Simon's 7th solo album. The storied mansion that sold on the date 8/1 was built for the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling. That's a record, in a way. Spelling produced the longest-running TV drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. So in other words, This is a way in which this mansion sale connects to Paul Simon, who sang about a mansion. Not only that, by the way, but Paul Simon's sale of his own mansion was a major prophetic sign, but that's another story. So anyway, we have the TV producer, the most prolific in history, who produced the longest running TV drama in history, Seventh Heaven, connecting to Paul Simon through the Mansion album, Graceland, which was his 7th solo album. So Aaron Spelling's Mansion sold on 8/1, and the sound of silence in heaven that is described in Revelation 8:1 is followed by the 7 trumpets of God's judgment. And so this is why. This is why we have this connection here to Paul Simon. And also, on 8/1 and the day of the sale of the storied mansion, there was a mass shooting in a bar named the Owl Bar. The cover art for Simon's 7 Psalms album uses Thomas Moran's painting, Two Owls. The shooting in the bar, in the Owl Bar, was in the 41st state. Simon was born in 41, and Jesus is the 41st name in Jesus' genealogy in the book of Matthew. Spelling also produced a TV movie, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which inspired the 4th single released from Simon's 7th album, The Boy in the Bubble. That's the name of the song. On the day of the sale of the mansion owned by the TV producer of Seventh Heaven, 4 people were killed in the mass shooting in the Owl Bar, which hints at 7 Psalms. 7 days after the death of 4 people in the Owl Bar, and the day of the mansion owned by and the day of the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven, and producer of the TV movie that inspired Simon's 4th single from his 7th album, the manhunt for the Owl Bar mass shooter who killed 4 people ended with his capture. Also, on 8/8, which is 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the TV producer of Seventh Heaven, also on this 8/8 date, were 2 prophetic signs that revealed that Paul Simon will die from a fall. On 8/8, it was reported that a water slide on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship had busted while a man was sliding down the slide. Simon's hit song, Slip Slidin Away, was on his 4th solo album that was released in 77. The Slip Slidin Away sign was 7 days after the death of 4 people in the Owl Bar on the day of the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven that inspired Simon's 4th single from the 7th album, About a Mansion. And coming back here for a second, the Royal Caribbean cruise ship sign hints at the king of rock and roll who owned the mansion. That the name of the song and album Graceland is named after. Also on this 8/8 date, the winner of a NASCAR race slipped and fell off the roof of his car when he was celebrating in Victory Lane. He broke his collarbone in front of the cameras of the media. This was on the date 8/8, and the driver slipped off of car number 88. The driver is known for being only 19 years old, and 19 is the 8th prime number. All of this points to Simon because of the sound of silence in heaven that is described in Revelation chapter 8, as well as the 7 trumpets of judgment in Revelation chapter 8. Revelation 8:8 regards the destruction of ships, hence the cruise ship sign on the date 8/8. The destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8 is part of the seven trumpets of judgment, and it follows the sound of silence in heaven in Revelation 8:1. The cruise ship sign was 7 days after signs on the date 8:1 that pointed to Simon, whose first hit was sound of silence, which alludes to or hints at Revelation 8:1, and the sound of silence in heaven that precedes the seven trumpets of judgment. Sound of Silence is from the album Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., which hints at the Hebrew idiom regarding God's judgment for 3 transgressions and for 4. Simon is predicted to fall on October 31st, exactly 3 times 4 weeks after the capture of the shooter of 4 people on the day of the signs involving the slide on the ship and the slip and fall of the driver of car number 88 on the date 8/8. Okay, so that's for 3 times 4 weeks exactly. It hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4, which, as I explained earlier, hints at the first album, Wednesday Morning 3 a.m., because Wednesday is the 4th day of the week and 3 a.m. is the 4th watch. And that's the album that contained the song The Sound of Silence. And so from this 8/8 date, which connected to 8/1, which symbolized the sound of silence, with the 7 days, as I just explained, and 8/8 hints at the ships that are destroyed in Revelation 8:8. That's why we had the cruise ship sign from this Paul Simon Slip Slidin Away sign, because again, his 4th album has the song Slip Slidin Away, which was released in 1977. It was a water slide on a ship. It was the top of the water slide, and the man was injured. He was slip sliding away on the slide when it broke. And it was the day that the man fell off the roof of his car, number 88, on the day 8/8. And he's 19, which is the 8th prime number. He slipped and fell. So, again, 3 times 4 weeks. It's amazing. That gets us from the 8/8 ships sign, the ship falling, slip sliding away signs, to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will slip and fall on October 31st. It is predicted that Simon will fall and injure his head on October 31st, 2025, which will be 8 weeks and 1 day, which hints at Revelation 8:1, after it was reported that the large bandage that former President Joe Biden was wearing was a result of him injuring his head. This was on the date 9/4, which is 4/9 outside the US. 9/4 was the 49th prime number of days after the sound of silence at the inauguration of President Trump when he replaced Joe Biden. The music stopped playing while Carrie Underwood during her performance at the inauguration while she stood in front of the 49th vice president. The predicted 49th president, Michelle Obama, was conspicuously absent from the inauguration ceremony. And that's the purpose of this connection here. Okay? God is identifying how the Antichrist will return to the White House. It is through running as her vice president, Michelle Obama, the 49th president. In other words, Barack Obama will become the 50th president, which is why he is from the 50th state. And is also incidentally why the 50 states gaffe during his run for the first time he became president, when he said he had visited all 57 states, which just happens to be the number of states in the Islamic Organization of Cooperation. So anyway, we have this 49th prime number of days, which is 227 days, between the sound of silence at the inauguration for President Trump, when Joe Biden was being replaced, with him in attendance in the front row, connecting to the day that Joe Biden was spotted with the bandage on his head. All right? And that day is in itself 8 weeks and 1 day to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will injure his head. And that's relevant because Paul Simon is symbolism for Revelation 8:1. Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the fourth day of the week, and 3 a.m. is the beginning of the fourth watch. This hints at the numbers 4 and 3 and the Hebrew idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4, as I explained, which means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. On September 18th, 2025, 4 military personnel died in a helicopter crash, and 3 people died in a plane crash that killed the composer of Underwood's, Carrie Underwood's hit song, Jesus Take the Wheel, which also hints at transportation, like a plane crash. September 18th, 2025 is 43 days before it is predicted Paul Simon will likewise fall and crash on October 31st. Okay, so I'll repeat that. For 3 transgressions and for 4 is what God is using Paul Simon to point to, as I explained earlier. And we have his first album, which hints at that also. But on this September 18th day, we had 4 deaths and 3 deaths in 2 aviation disasters, which were both prophetic. The second one actually killed the composer of Carrie Underwood's big hit, Jesus Take the Wheel, which isn't just a coincidence because Carrie Underwood and the connections that I've already explained involving her, but also the name of the song, Jesus Take the Wheel, is a hint at taking the wheel of a vehicle. All right? And it was a plane crash. Anyway, that gives us the 4 and 3 deaths, gives us hints at the 43 days. Between the 4 and 3 deaths to Paul Simon's predicted fall and crash. Now, Carrie Underwood's performance was interrupted by a sound of silence. The composer of Sound of Silence famously married Carrie Fisher. Carrie Underwood's famous marriage is to a former NHL hockey star, Mike Fisher. So Carrie married Fisher. And Paul Simon is a fisherman because Paul and Simon Peter are the 2 leading fishers of men apostles, one to the Jews, one to the Greeks, the Gentiles. And that's why Paul Simon married Carrie Fisher. On September 19th, 2025, it was reported that famous actor Tom Holland, the actor who played Spider-Man in 6 movies, suffered a head concussion while filming the latest Spider-Man movie. The actor who has played Spider-Man in 6 movies injured his head exactly 6 weeks before it is predicted that Paul Simon will injure his head. The character Spider-Man is known for swinging from heights. Simon's predicted head injury is predicted to be due to a fall. Simon's predicted fall and head injury is predicted to occur on Halloween. Spiders are used in Halloween motifs. In God's signs, Paul Simon is symbolism for Revelation chapter 8. Revelation chapter 8 describes tsunamis. Tom Holland's first role in a movie was as a teenager in the movie named The Impossible, which was a movie about the Indian Ocean tsunami. Holland's head injury during the filming of his 4th standalone Spider-Man movie was 4 + 4 + 4 days after the blood moon lunar eclipse over the Indian Ocean on September 7th, 2025. And that eclipse really did point to the Indian Ocean. And 85% of the world's population at least had an opportunity, if it wasn't cloudy, to see the eclipse. Now, this eclipse over the Indian Ocean was exactly 2,520 plus 2,000. First of all, I should say that God repeats the number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning. This eclipse over the Indian Ocean was exactly 2,520 plus 2,520 plus 2,520 days after the Indian Ocean tsunami. This number 2,520 comes from the most central prophecy in the Bible, Daniel chapter 9. And it is symbolic of the end times period and the Antichrist. Okay, so, and the Antichrist, the 44th president, grew up in Indonesia for 4 years. Indonesia is where the Indian Ocean tsunami emanated from, which then traversed across the Indian Ocean, where the eclipse was over. So, this is just, this is just so amazing, in my opinion. I mean, every connection in this video is amazing. And who can put it on a scale? But on a personal level, I love this one. This just because it's for one thing, it spans so many years. But also, I was in Thailand, coincidentally, on my 1-month trip. It's not like I was living there. And during that time, during the Indian Ocean tsunami. Anyway, the Indian Ocean tsunami again was 3 times the prophetic number of days that symbolized the end times to the eclipse, the lunar eclipse over the Indian Ocean, which then connects with 4 plus 4 plus 4 days to the filming of this actor's 4th standalone movie, the actor whose first role, and God uses firsts for signs, whose first role was in the movie The Impossible, which is the movie about the Indian Ocean tsunami. It's just amazing. So, hats off to God being the most creative creator, the creative genius that could have put all this together here. And yeah, obviously I didn't concoct all this. This is, I'll just say this, even if the skeptic is correct and that I somehow tricked the social media platform you were watching this video on to post the video and have a post date prior to October 31st. And if I were able to do that with the email and the forensic notes PDF document also, somehow, and fool you, do you think that I could have created the information in this paragraph? Is it possible to even do such a thing? No, of course not. A woman was convicted of fraudulently telling to take possession of Elvis Presley's Graceland estate in order to try and sell it in an auction through claiming that Lisa Marie Presley took a $3.8 million loan and used the Graceland estate as collateral. She was sentenced on September 23rd, 2025, 38 days, which is why she tried to steal the mansion for $3.8 million, before it is predicted that the composer of the album Graceland, which is about the mansion and the Graceland estate, will fall and hit his head and then die. Okay? Let me just say, if you didn't know, there was a woman who was in the news and it was even in the news prior to the judge ruling. I mean, the granddaughter of Elvis Presley had to take this to court and to try to prove the truth, which is that her mother, Lisa Marie Presley, didn't take a loan for $3.8 million from this supposed banking institution, money lender, in order to try to save the Graceland estate. But the whole ruse was for $3.8 million. And that's why, from the day she was sentenced, it is 38 days to the predicted fall of the composer of Graceland. And Elvis, again, I'm about to mention it right here. Okay, it is believed by many medical professionals that Elvis Presley died from the autoimmune diseases that were caused by his fall in 1967 when he hit his head on a porcelain bathtub. Okay? That's how Elvis Presley is connecting to Paul Simon's predicted head fall here too. Not only did Simon sing about Graceland, which connects to Elvis, and also Elvis Presley covered Simon's song, Bridge Over Troubled Water. He famously covered that song. Well, anyway, So it's amazing. So many people don't know this, by the way. Elvis Presley, was doing a lot of drugs, but they were all for Elvis. Elvis was taking these drugs to compensate, to help him out with the autoimmune diseases that he was suffering from, which is now believed to have been caused by his head fall. And that's all prophetic too, by the way, because Elvis Presley is credited with making VACCINEs popular with the baby boomer generation when he took one publicly before he performed at the Ed Sullivan Theater on the Ed Sullivan Show. Okay? And had it not been for that, who knows? The rest of history would have been different. Also, Elvis Presley made a movie at the World's Fair in Seattle, which was when the Space Needle opened. The Space Needle is symbolism for the transhumanism technology that is the thing, the thing that the SHOT, right? So that's also, and the SHOT causes autoimmune diseases, which are going to get worse for these people that have already taken it as time goes. Okay? And that's the connection here. That's also what's going on here prophetically with all of this. Now, the woman was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months in jail, and this was the 4 plus 4th prime number of days after it was reported on the date 9/4 that the 4 times 4th semi-prime number president had suffered a head injury. So let's go through this. Okay, so the date 9/4 is 4 plus 4th prime number of days back to the 4 times 4th semi-prime number of president with his head injury, okay? So in other words, 9/4, the 4 times 4th semi-prime number president, the 46th president, was in the news for injuring his head 19 days, which is the 4 plus 4th prime number of days, before the woman was sentenced to 4 years and 9 months, which confirms the connection to the date 9/4. And in the previous paragraph, I explained how Biden's head injury date connects with Simon's predicted fall and injury of his head. Where was that? It's 8 weeks and 1 day, which is Revelation 8:1. So there you have this connection here involving this Graceland Estate news story, which obviously hints at Paul Simon. This is merely scratching the surface of the reasons for how this prediction is known in advance. For more information, please visit odyssey.com, spelled ODYSEE.com, or rumble.com video channel, Asteroid Prediction, and also read the website trumpprediction.com. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction that is from God is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.